Have you ever felt that strange pressure to explain yourself? Even when you know deep down you don't owe anyone an explanation, and the moment you start talking, you can almost feel your power leaking out sentence by sentence. That pressure is everywhere now. People want updates, they want access, they want your reasons, they want you to turn your private life into a public story so they can judge it, comment on it, compare it to theirs, and then move on like it was entertainment. And if you're not careful, you start living like your life needs approval to be real. But here's the truth. The strongest version of you doesn't argue for attention. He builds, he improves, he moves in silence. And when he finally shows up, he doesn't need to announce who he is. Reality does it for him. That's why this episode is called Focus on Yourself and Stay Silent. Not because silence is a trick, and not because you're trying to seem mysterious, but because silence, when it comes from self-respect, becomes control. It protects your energy from being spent on proving, defending, and reacting. It keeps your mind clean. It keeps your plans alive long enough to become real. The Stoics understood this with a kind of calm ruthlessness. Epictetus kept reminding people that the moment you hand your peace to other people's opinions, you become their servant. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by noise, criticism, and betrayal, trained himself to do what was right without needing to win the room. Seneca warned that the crowd can steal your soul, not by force, but by temptation. Temptation to be seen, to be praised, to be understood by everyone. So if 2026 is going to be your year, it won't be because you posted a new identity. It will be because you stopped feeding your life to people who don't build it. You started choosing privacy over performance, standards over speeches, results over arguments. As you listen, notice the moments where your mind wants to defend itself, or explain itself, or get the last word. That's not a random urge. That's the old you trying to stay in control through noise. And we're going to replace that with a quieter kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need permission to grow. All right, let's begin. 1. Silence is power when you know who you are. Have you ever noticed that there are two kinds of silence and they feel completely different in your body? The silence that comes from fear, where you're biting your tongue because you're unsure of yourself, and the silence that comes from strength, where you're calm because you don't need to prove anything. Most people confuse these, and that confusion keeps them stuck. They think silence is weakness because they've experienced silence as avoidance, as self-doubt, as waiting for permission. But silence isn't automatically power. Silence becomes power only when it's built on something solid inside you, when you know who you are, what you stand for, what you're willing to do, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. Without that inner foundation, silence is just absence. With it, silence is control. This is where the Stoics were quietly dangerous. Epictetus used to say that if you want to be free, you have to stop handing the keys of your inner life to other people. Not in a dramatic way, in a practical way. Because the moment you need someone's approval to feel okay, you start performing. The moment you need to be understood to feel safe, you start explaining. The moment you need to be liked to feel secure, you start bending. And then your life becomes this exhausting project of managing impressions. You're not living, you're negotiating. Silence interrupts that negotiation. But again, only if you're not using silence as a hiding place. The goal isn't to become a statue. The goal is to become grounded. To reach that point where you can feel the pull to defend yourself and still choose restraint. Not because you're scared, but because you're clear. Think about how often people talk themselves into weakness. Someone criticizes them and they rush to justify. Someone misunderstands them and they panic and over-explain. Someone challenges their boundary and they turn it into a long, emotional speech, hoping the other person will finally get it. And sometimes the other person does get it, but not in the way you want. They get that your boundary is negotiable, that your confidence is shaky, that if they push hard enough, you'll start pleading for respect instead of requiring it. This is why the strongest silence is not passive, it's decisive. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that he didn't need to waste time arguing about what a good man is. He needed to be won. That line is a blade, because so much of modern life is arguing, explaining, presenting, announcing, narrating. And the Stoic move is less narration, more character. Less performance, more practice. Less talk, more proof. So the first question you have to ask yourself is uncomfortable, but it clears everything up fast. When I go quiet, what am I protecting, my dignity or my fear? If the honest answer is fear, then silence won't feel like power yet. It will feel like pressure. It will feel like swallowing words, like shrinking, and that's not where we want to live. If the honest answer is dignity, then your silence becomes a kind of calm authority. You're not quiet because you're afraid of conflict. You're quiet because you refuse to do emotional labor for people who aren't committed to understanding you. You refuse to argue with someone who has already decided. You refuse to chase clarity in a room that thrives on confusion. That's a different kind of life. And it starts with identity, not the identity you announce, the identity you live when nobody is watching. Musonius Rufus, one of the lesser-quoted Stoic teachers, talked a lot about practice, how philosophy isn't a performance. It's training for the situations that test your character. That's what this is. Silence is not a personality. Silence is a skill, and the skill is built by daily proof that you can govern yourself. Because self-governance is what creates the feeling of, I know who I am. You don't get that feeling from affirmations. You get it from alignment, your actions matching your values repeatedly. So here's what it looks like in real life when silence is power. Someone tries to provoke you with a comment that would normally hook your ego. The old you would jump in, correct them, prove something, maybe even escalate. The new you pauses, feels the heat rise and realizes, I don't need to win this moment. I need to protect my mind. And you let it pass. You respond later, or not at all, or with a single clean sentence. And the most important part is what happens inside you afterward. You don't feel weak. You feel free. You feel like you kept your center. Or someone asks you questions that aren't really questions. They're fishing for access. They want details, not because they care, but because they're curious, because they want to compare, because they want to feel relevant. The old you would fill the space, hoping openness equals connection. The new you gives less. Not in a rude way, in a contained way. You answer what's necessary and you leave the rest private. And again, the important part is internal. You don't feel guilty. You feel protected. That's what power feels like when it's quiet. It doesn't feel like domination. It feels like self-respect. Now, let's be honest about why this is hard. Because silence exposes you. When you stop talking, you stop distracting yourself. You stop controlling the narrative. You stop covering insecurity with words. And the mind hates that at first. The mind will say, if I don't explain, they'll misunderstand. If I don't defend myself, they'll think I'm wrong. If I don't speak, I'll lose status. That's the crowd inside your head. That's the part of you still living for external permission. Epictetus would call that slavery, not as an insult, as a diagnosis. So the practice is to build a new reflex. When the urge to explain shows up, you treat it like any other impulse. You examine it before you obey it. You ask, is speaking right now aligned with my values, or is it an attempt to control perception? Because those are not the same. Speaking to clarify is noble. Speaking to beg for approval is expensive. And here's a practical rule you can actually use. If you feel rushed to respond, don't. Rushed responses are usually ego responses. They're usually fear responses. Calm responses come from ownership, so you slow it down. You breathe. You let a little silence exist. You let the room feel slightly uncomfortable. That discomfort is not danger. That discomfort is you growing out of your old reflex. Another practical move. Let your life answer questions your mouth used to answer. If you keep saying you're disciplined, stop saying it and just become consistent. If you keep saying you're changing, stop saying it and let your routine change. If you keep explaining why you deserve respect, stop explaining and enforce boundaries. This is the Stoic method in modern form. Replace speeches with standards. And the secret is, once you start doing this, people feel it. Not everyone will like it. Some people benefited from your openness. Some people benefited from your over-explaining. Some people benefited from your need to be understood. When you get quieter, you remove their leverage. They can't pull you into emotional debates as easily. They can't get free access to your plans. They can't keep you in the arena of words where nothing is ever settled. So yes, there's a cost. Silence costs you certain dynamics, but it gives you yourself back. Now, I want to say something that might sound small, but it changes everything. Knowing who you are is not a thought. It's a pattern. It's what you keep doing when you're tired. It's what you refuse to do when you're triggered. It's what you practice in private when nobody rewards you. That's why silence becomes power after you build identity, not before. Because once you have that pattern, you don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to argue. You don't need to perform. You can let misunderstanding exist without panicking. You can let people think what they think without chasing them. You can be misjudged and remain stable because your stability isn't rented from their opinions. Marcus Aurelius would call that inner citadel, a place in you that stays intact even when the world is loud. So here's the quiet challenge embedded inside this first habit. Notice how often you speak to reduce anxiety, not to communicate truth. And when you notice it, don't attack yourself. Just pause. Let one moment of silence happen. Let the urge pass without obeying it. Then choose words only if they serve your standard. Because when you can do that, when your silence is no longer fear but self-command, everything else gets easier. Boundaries become cleaner. Relationships become clearer. Your energy stops leaking. And that naturally leads to the next idea, because once you taste the power of grounded silence, you realize you don't need to perform to be respected. You need to let boundaries speak for you. 2. Stop performing. Let boundaries speak. Have you ever noticed how the moment you try to explain your boundary too much, it starts to sound like a request instead of a decision? That's the trap. And it's subtle, because it hides inside good intentions. You want to be fair. You want to be understood. You don't want conflict. You don't want to look harsh. So you soften your boundary with extra words. And those extra words feel polite, but they often carry a quiet message underneath. Please accept this. Please don't be mad. Please still like me. And once a boundary depends on being liked, it stops being a boundary. It becomes a negotiation. This is why people with weak boundaries end up exhausted. Not because they're bad people, but because they keep performing. They perform kindness. They perform openness. They perform flexibility. They perform being easy to deal with. They shapeshift to keep the room calm, even when the room is disrespecting them. And then they go home and feel that familiar inner resentment. Why do I always end up here? Why do people keep doing this to me? Why can't I just say no? Stoicism gives you a clean answer because your boundary isn't clear to you yet, so it can't be clear to anyone else. Epictetus would say the work begins inside. If you don't decide what is acceptable, you will keep reacting in the moment. And reacting in the moment usually means obeying fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of losing someone, fear of being seen as difficult. And fear makes boundaries long and emotional. It makes them shaky. It makes them apologetic. But strong boundaries are simple. They're quiet, they're consistent, they don't need a speech. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to live without begging for approval, and one way you can feel that in his writing is how little he tries to convince anyone. He keeps returning to his own standards. He reminds himself, do what is right, keep your character, let other people be who they are. That is the spirit of boundaries that speak for themselves. You don't threaten, you don't dramatize, you don't announce, you just live your rule. And that's what a boundary really is, a rule you enforce with your behavior. Not a mood, not an emotional burst, not a message you send when you're finally fed up. A rule. So let's get concrete, because this is where most people fail. They think boundaries are something you say, but boundaries are something you do. Words are only the invitation. The enforcement is the boundary. For example, if someone speaks to you disrespectfully, the boundary is not the speech you give about respect. The boundary is that you end the conversation. You lower your voice. You say one clean sentence. We'll talk when it's respectful, and you leave. That's it. No lecture, no emotional sermon, just a decision. If someone keeps violating your time, the boundary is not, please be on time, because it hurts my feelings. The boundary is that you stop rearranging your life around their lateness. You start at the agreed time. You leave when you said you would leave. You don't punish them. You don't complain. You just stop accommodating the pattern. If someone keeps asking for access to your personal life, the boundary is not explaining your entire history and why privacy matters to you. The boundary is that you share less. You change the subject. You answer with calm brevity. You don't reward curiosity with intimacy. This is what it means to let boundaries speak. Your life becomes the explanation. Now here's the part that makes this habit emotionally difficult. When you stop performing, some people will react. Not because you became bad, but because the old version of you was easier to use. Some people benefited from your guilt. Some people benefited from your over-explaining. Some people benefited from your willingness to bend. And when you stop bending, they call it selfish. They call it cold. They call it you changed. And that sentence, you changed, is often not an observation. It's a complaint. It means you stopped making it easy for me. This is where stoic clarity matters, because if you're not prepared, you'll retreat, you'll feel guilty, you'll start explaining again, you'll start trying to manage their emotions, and then you're back in performance. Seneca warned that wanting to be loved by everyone is a form of weakness because it makes you dependent on the crowd, and boundaries are one of the fastest ways to break that dependency, because a real boundary forces you to accept a hard truth. Some people only approve of you when you abandon yourself. So the question becomes, are you building a life that is respected or a life that is approved? Approval is cheap. Respect is earned, and respect begins with self-respect. Now, there's a very practical reason boundaries should be brief. The longer your boundary explanation, the more openings you create for debate. People can argue with your reasons. They can pick at your wording. They can call you dramatic. They can twist it into a negotiation. But when your boundary is short, there's nothing to grab. There's no rope to pull. That's why no is a complete sentence. That's why I'm not available for that is stronger than I'm not available because. The because is where people start bargaining. And yes, there are times to explain when it's someone you genuinely trust, someone who has shown they care, someone who has earned that deeper conversation. But most over-explaining is not trust, it's anxiety. So here's a simple internal test. When you feel the urge to explain, ask, am I explaining to clarify or to avoid discomfort? If it's discomfort, shorten it. Now let's talk about the deepest part of this habit. Boundaries reveal identity. When you set a boundary, you're not just managing someone else. You're declaring who you are. You're saying, I am someone who does not tolerate disrespect. I am someone who values my time. I am someone who protects my peace. I am someone who doesn't negotiate my standards. This is why boundaries feel scary. They make you responsible for being the person you claim to be. A lot of people want the benefits of boundaries without the cost. They want respect without enforcement. But there's no such thing. If you don't enforce your boundary, you teach people that your words are just mood, and then you feel powerless. That's why the most important boundary is not the one you set with others. It's the one you set with yourself. When I say no, I will not betray myself 5 minutes later. That's the real contract. So here's the practical method you can use to build this habit without becoming aggressive or cold. First, decide your non-negotiables in private. Not 10, just 1 or 2. Choose the ones that have been draining you the most. Maybe it's your time. Maybe it's disrespect. Maybe it's constant access. Maybe it's being pulled into drama. Decide, this is no longer allowed in my life. Second, craft one clean sentence for each boundary. A sentence that is calm and direct. No anger, no pleading. Something like, I'm not available for that. I won't continue this conversation if it stays disrespectful. I need advance notice. I don't share that. Keep it simple enough that you can say it under stress. Third, enforce with behavior. This is everything. If the boundary is crossed, you act. You leave. You pause the conversation. You stop replying. You follow through, not in revenge, in consistency, because consistency is what turns a boundary into a reality. And here's the if-then that makes it automatic. If you catch yourself over-explaining, then stop mid-sentence, shorten it, and return to the clean line. You'll feel the discomfort. Let it be there. That discomfort is the old performance dying. Now, when you live this way for a while, something changes in you. You start feeling less resentful because you're no longer abandoning yourself. You start feeling calmer because you're no longer managing other people's reactions. You start feeling stronger because you're no longer begging for respect through words. You're requiring it through standards. And then something even more interesting happens. You stop needing to narrate your life at all. Once boundaries are real, once your energy is protected, once your standards are lived, you realize your life doesn't need a press release. You don't need to announce your plans, explain your moves, or update people on your progress. You can just build, quietly, consistently. 3. Your life doesn't need a press release. Have you ever noticed how the moment you tell people what you're about to do, a strange part of you relaxes, as if the talking itself became a substitute for the doing? That's not imagination. That's a real psychological trap. When you announce your plans, you often get a small dose of satisfaction, attention, encouragement, curiosity, even admiration, and your mind quietly treats that as progress. It's like your brain caches the reward early before the work is done. Then, when it's time to actually build, the urgency feels weaker because the ego already got fed. This is why so many people stay stuck in a cycle of starting but never finishing. They live in updates. They live in explanations. They live in telling the story of the person they want to become, instead of enduring the quiet boredom of becoming him. And here's the hard truth. The more you feel the need to announce your life, the less anchored you are in it. Because announcing is a way of asking for permission. It's a way of seeking validation. It's a way of controlling the narrative so you feel safe. It's a way of saying, please witness me, please approve, please don't misunderstand. But life doesn't improve from being witnessed. Life improves from being lived. Stoicism is brutally aligned with this. Epictetus would tell you that if your sense of peace depends on how other people interpret you, then you're not living your life, you're living their imagination. And that is a form of dependence that looks normal because everyone does it, but it quietly ruins focus. Because when you're attached to being seen, you become attached to the crowd. And the crowd is unstable. Today they clap. Tomorrow they forget. Today they praise. tomorrow they judge. A press release life is a fragile life. A private life built on standards is harder to shake. Marcus Aurelius, again, was surrounded by the ultimate audience. People watched his decisions, his expression, his mood. He could have turned his life into constant image management. But what you feel in his writing is someone constantly trying to return to inner truth, to right action, to integrity without theater. He keeps reminding himself, don't act for applause, don't become addicted to approval, don't perform virtue, practice it. There's a line of thought he returns to repeatedly: do what is right and accept that people will say what they say. That is the antidote to the press release mentality. Now, let's make this painfully relatable. Think about how often you feel tempted to explain your mission to people who aren't building with you. You feel like if they understand, you'll be supported. If they support you, you'll feel confident. And if you feel confident, you'll finally follow through. But the confidence you borrow from people's reactions is weak confidence. It collapses the moment someone doubts you. It collapses the moment someone laughs. It collapses the moment someone is indifferent. Then you either over-explain again, or you quit quietly, or you start searching for a new audience. That's not focus. That's performance. A Stoic would ask, why are you giving your future away to the opinions of people who don't live your life? Seneca wrote about how the crowd pulls you toward its values, not necessarily through malice, but through gravity. You start wanting what they want. You start fearing what they fear. You start caring about what they care about. And one of the most dangerous ways the crowd pulls you is through conversation, through commentary, through advice, through curiosity. Because once you start discussing your plans in public, you invite interference. You invite opinions you didn't ask for. You invite doubt, envy, guilt, pressure, comparisons. Even well-meaning people can contaminate your clarity. And for certain people, your growth makes them uncomfortable, not because they hate you, but because it holds up a mirror. So they ask questions, they joke, they critique, they remind you of your past, they tell you to be realistic. They subtly pull you back toward the version of you that made them feel safe. And if your plans live in the open, your plans become vulnerable to that pull. This is why the Stoic move is simple. Keep your progress private until it has roots, not forever, just long enough to protect the seed. Because seeds don't grow under constant inspection, they grow under soil. And your new life needs soil, silence, focus, consistency, repetition, boring days, unseen effort. That's how anything real is built. Now, there's another layer here that's even more important. A press release life isn't only about talking to other people, it's also about talking to yourself in a performative way. You start narrating your own life as if you're posting it. You start thinking in captions. You start imagining how things look. You start crafting identity instead of crafting character. And character is what matters, because character survives when nobody is watching. So the practice becomes this: stop narrating, start building. Instead of telling people, I'm going to change my life, you change one habit quietly. Instead of telling people, I'm working on myself, you do the work without needing recognition. Instead of explaining why you're pulling back, you pull back. Instead of announcing your next move, you make it. And when people notice, let them notice. You don't need to guide their interpretation. You don't need to control the story. Reality will do the introduction. Here's where this becomes extremely practical. You must decide who gets access to your vision, because not everyone deserves it. Some people confuse curiosity with care. They ask for details, but they don't contribute. They ask for updates, but they don't support. They ask because it entertains them, or because it gives them material to judge, or because it makes them feel connected without actually being committed. A Stoic would say, protect what is valuable, and your vision is valuable. So it's wise to keep your plans simple and private, and only share them with those who have earned trust. people who have shown integrity, people who want your good, people whose presence makes you stronger, not weaker. Everyone else gets the surface. They get the basic version. They get the polite answer. They don't get the blueprint, because the blueprint is not for spectators. Now, here's the temptation that will try to sabotage you, the urge to prove. When someone doubts you, you want to prove them wrong. When someone underestimates you, you want to announce the plan to shock them later. When someone ignores you, you want to post something to be seen. But proving is still performance. Proving is still giving them your energy. Proving is still them sitting in the center of your mind. So the Stoic move is, don't prove, improve. Let that be the ethic, because improvement is real, proof is ego. And you can test yourself with a simple question. When I want to announce something, what am I really asking for? If you're asking for guidance from a wise person you trust, that can be good. If you're asking for accountability from someone who's committed to you, that can be good. But if you're asking for reassurance, for validation, for approval, for attention, for emotional comfort, then you're feeding the part of you that will keep you dependent. So here's an if-then that locks this habit in. If you feel the urge to announce your next move, then do one private action instead. One action that moves the plan forward, not a message, not a post. An action that turns the craving for attention into momentum. Over time, this changes your entire emotional life. You start feeling more stable because you're not living on people's reactions. You start feeling more focused because you're not constantly updating the room. You start feeling more powerful because your energy is going into building, not into explaining. And then you naturally begin to appreciate something most people misunderstand. Privacy is not hiding. Privacy is control. And once you accept that, you stop feeling guilty for being private, and you stop confusing openness with strength. 4. Privacy is not hiding. It's control. Have you ever felt guilty for keeping something to yourself? As if privacy automatically means you're doing something wrong, or you're being dishonest, or you're trying to hide. That guilt is one of the quiet ways the world steals your power, because it pushes you to overshare when you should be protecting your mind, your plans, your peace, and sometimes even the people you love. The modern culture treats access like a right. It trains people to believe that if they ask, you should answer. And if you don't answer, you must be insecure or secretive or arrogant. But that belief is not truth. It's pressure. And pressure is not a reason to surrender your inner life. Privacy is not hiding. Privacy is control. Hiding comes from fear. Privacy comes from discernment. Hiding is when you avoid truth because you can't face it. Privacy is when you protect truth because it's valuable. And the difference between those two shows up in how you feel. Hiding feels tense, defensive, shaky. Privacy feels clean, calm, deliberate. Privacy doesn't ask for permission. It simply exists. The Stoics understood this in a way that's almost radical today. Epictetus taught that your peace depends on what is truly yours, your judgments, your choices, your character, and the moment you let other people's opinions reach into that space, you become dependent. And what is oversharing, if not a habit of letting other people reach into your inner world? You hand them your motives, you hand them your struggles, you hand them your dreams. You hand them your unfinished thoughts, and then you wait, sometimes without realizing it, for them to approve or reassure or validate, or even just react. That waiting is a chain. Marcus Aurelius spoke to himself as someone trying to stay free inside a noisy world. He reminds himself again and again not to perform, not to be pulled by attention, not to be dragged into the crowd's emotional weather. There's a line that captures the essence of privacy as control. I have to stay on my own side, not in selfishness, in discipline, because your inner life is where your decisions are formed. And if your inner life becomes public property, open to commentary, judgment, misunderstanding, you start living outward instead of inward. And living outward looks normal until you feel the consequences. You become reactive. You become easily influenced. You start changing your goals based on people's responses. You start doubting your own instincts because someone made a face. You start editing your life before you even live it. Seneca warned about the crowd for a reason. He didn't hate people. He hated what happens to your mind when you're constantly exposed. The crowd pulls you into shallow priorities. It rewards performance. It turns your attention into a currency you keep spending without noticing. And privacy is one of the only ways to stop that spending. It's the act of saying, my mind is not a public square. So let's make this practical, because privacy is not an abstract virtue. It shows up in small moments. It's when someone asks you personal questions and you don't feel obligated to answer just because they asked. You don't panic. You don't over-explain. You don't invent a long story to justify your boundary. You simply keep what is yours. Yours. It's when you're building something and you don't share the blueprint with people who only want to look at it, judge it, and move on. You protect the seed while it's still fragile. You let it become real before you let it become public. It's when you're healing and you stop narrating the healing. You stop turning your private process into content for other people's curiosity. You do the work in quiet, where it can actually take root. It's when you stop handing people your vulnerabilities as a way to buy connection. Some people will meet vulnerability with care, but others will store it and use it later, and you will feel that cold lesson. Not everyone deserves the soft parts of you. And once you learn that lesson, privacy stops feeling like guilt and starts feeling like wisdom. Here's the hardest part. Many people overshare because they confuse openness with intimacy. They think if they tell you everything, the relationship becomes real. But intimacy is not about volume of information. Intimacy is about trust. And trust is earned through consistency, respect, and character, not through forced confession. You can be open with the wrong person and end up feeling lonelier than before. You can be private with the right person and still feel deeply connected, because connection doesn't require you to expose everything. It requires you to be seen accurately by someone who has earned that privilege. This is why privacy is control. It gives you the ability to choose who gets access. And that choice matters, because your inner world is not an unlimited resource. Every time you explain yourself, you spend energy. Every time you defend yourself, you spend energy. Every time you share something tender with someone who doesn't handle it well, you spend energy. And sometimes you spend peace for weeks afterward. Privacy is how you stop bleeding. Now, there's a psychological reality here that will make you uncomfortable at first. When you become more private, you will trigger people who are used to having access. Some people will interpret your privacy as rejection. Some will interpret it as arrogance. Some will try to provoke you into explaining. Some will joke about you being secretive. Some will push harder, because pushing is how they stay in control. This is exactly why privacy is power. It shows you who respects you without access, and it shows you who only feels safe when they can monitor you. A Stoic would see this clearly. Epictetus would say, don't be disturbed by their reaction. Their reaction belongs to them. Your boundary belongs to you. Your job is not to manage their feelings. Your job is to live according to your standard. And your standard here is simple. I don't owe everyone my life. Another reason privacy matters is because it protects clarity. When you keep certain things private, you give your mind space to think without interference. You give your emotions space to settle without being interrogated. You give your decisions time to mature before they face opinion. Most bad decisions are not made because people are stupid. They're made because people are rushed. They're made under emotional pressure. They're made while trying to protect an image. They're made while trying to satisfy someone else's expectations. Privacy reduces that pressure. It lets you decide from stillness. This is why privacy is not hiding. Hiding is running from reality. Privacy is refusing to let reality be distorted by outside noise before you've even processed it. So how do you build this habit without becoming cold? You build it with calm language and consistent behavior. You don't need an aggressive posture. You don't need to act mysterious. You don't need to play games. You simply become selective. You share your life in layers. Surface layer for most people. Polite, light, basic. Deeper layer for trusted people. Honest, specific, meaningful. Deepest layer for very few, your real fears, your real dreams, your real wounds, your real plans. This is not manipulation, this is maturity, because not everyone earns the same access to you, and pretending they do is how people get hurt. Here's an if-then that makes it actionable in real time. If someone asks for details you don't want to share, then answer briefly and redirect, without apology. Something as simple as, "I'm keeping that private," or "I'm good, just focused lately," and then move on. Let the silence do some work. Let the discomfort exist. You don't need to fill it. If they respect you, they'll follow your lead. If they don't, they'll reveal themselves. And there's another if-then that protects your mind. If you feel the urge to overshare because you're anxious, then pause and write it privately instead. One paragraph for yourself. Oversharing often isn't communication. It's emotional discharge. Give that discharge a private place to go, and you'll stop using other people as emotional containers. Over time, privacy does something surprising. It makes you feel safer in your own skin, because you're no longer constantly exposed. You're no longer constantly explainable. You're no longer constantly available. You become contained, and containment is strength. And once you taste that strength, you stop needing to announce your rebuilding. You stop needing updates. You stop needing a running commentary on your progress. You rebuild in quiet because you finally understand. The best kind of growth happens when it's protected from noise. That's where we go next. 5. Rebuild in quiet. No announcements, no updates. Have you ever noticed how rebuilding becomes harder the moment you start telling people you're rebuilding, like the work becomes heavier, not because the work itself changed, but because now there's a subtle audience attached to it? Now people expect progress, they expect a story, they expect consistency you can perform on demand. And if you slip because you're human, you don't just feel the slip, you feel the embarrassment of the slip. You feel the urge to explain the gap. You feel pressure to show that you're still on track. And that pressure is poison for real change, because real change isn't a straight line. It's uneven, it's private, it's quiet repetition on days you don't feel heroic. Stoicism would call this simple. Don't make your growth dependent on external eyes, because the moment your growth becomes something you display, your growth becomes vulnerable to praise and criticism, two forces that can both pull you off course. Praise can make you complacent. Criticism can make you defensive. Both can make you perform, and performance is the enemy of rebuilding, because performance is about looking strong, while rebuilding is about becoming strong. Epictetus would say, "Your job is to care for your own mind, to train your judgments, to govern your choices." Those are internal tasks. They don't need witnesses, they don't need applause, they need consistency, and consistency is easier to protect when it's quiet. Marcus Aurelius practiced this kind of quiet rebuilding constantly, even when the world watched him, because he understood a harsh truth. The crowd will never fully understand your inner work. They will interpret your progress through their own fears and desires. They will project. They will misunderstand. They will reduce your complexity into a simple story, and if you try to correct their story, you'll lose your time. So he returns to a simpler mission. Do the work. Live the standard. Let people say what they say. Seneca would add another warning. The mind loves drama. It loves grand declarations. It loves the emotional reset. But the dramatic reset often fades when the ordinary day arrives. Quiet rebuilding avoids this trap because it doesn't depend on emotion. It depends on repetition. So what does it mean to rebuild in quiet in a way that changes your life? It means you stop announcing the new version of you before he exists. You stop telling people you're changing your routine. You stop promising big transformations. You stop explaining your new philosophy. You stop updating people on your progress. You stop sending the message, "I'm working on myself now," as if that message is the work. Instead, you do the boring part. You wake up and you do the small thing you said you'd do. You train, you read, you work, you clean up your habits, you reduce your input, you protect your sleep, you keep your mouth calmer, you enforce boundaries, you fix what you can fix, you accept what you can't, and you do it again tomorrow. That repetition is rebuilding, and the quiet is what protects it. Because rebuilding is fragile at the beginning. It's like a new identity that hasn't solidified yet. It needs space, it needs privacy, it needs time away from judgment. If you expose it too early, the smallest criticism can make you doubt. The smallest praise can make you relax. The smallest misunderstanding can make you explain. And suddenly, your energy is not going into building, it's going into managing reactions. Quiet rebuilding keeps your energy where it belongs. Now, let's get painfully practical. There are 3 kinds of updates that ruin rebuilding. The first is the external update, telling people where you are, what you're doing, what you're planning, how you're changing. Most of the time, this is not communication. It's reassurance seeking. It's the mind saying, "I need someone to see me so I feel real." But you don't need to feel real. You need to be real. The second is the social update, posting, announcing, hinting, dropping breadcrumbs, trying to be seen without saying you're trying to be seen. This is still performance, and it's exhausting. It also invites comparison, because the moment you share a new path publicly, you invite people to measure it, interpret it, advise it, critique it. Some will support, but many will distract. The third is the internal update, narrating your progress to yourself like you're writing a story for others. This is the most invisible one. You start thinking in a way that's shaped by how it would look. You start crafting identity instead of doing actions, and then you wake up one day and realize you've been living inside your own PR campaign. Quiet rebuilding kills all 3. It brings you back to a simple question. What is the next small action? That's how you rebuild a body. That's how you rebuild a mind. That's how you rebuild self-respect. That's how you rebuild a career. That's how you rebuild a relationship with yourself after you've disappointed yourself. One small action repeated. Now, there's something else that happens when you rebuild in quiet. You start hearing yourself again. When you stop talking about your growth, you become more aware of your actual motives. You start noticing when you want to improve to impress versus improve to evolve. You start noticing what you truly value when nobody's clapping. You start noticing what your real fears are when you're not distracting yourself with updates and explanations. And that self-awareness is priceless, because rebuilding without self-awareness becomes another performance, another attempt to become an image. Stoicism is not about becoming an image, it's about becoming free. So the discipline here is, let your progress be private until it becomes stable enough to survive the world. And stability has a signature. It continues even when nobody knows. If you only do the habit when people ask about it, it's not a habit, it's a performance. If you only stay disciplined when you can report it, it's not discipline, it's image management. But if you keep doing it when nobody sees, now it's yours. Now it's character. Now it's identity. Now it's real. Seneca would call this the true test of virtue. What you do when it costs you something and nobody rewards you. That's where the soul becomes strong. Now, a common fear. If I don't tell anyone, how will I stay accountable? This is where maturity matters. Accountability is useful, but it has to be chosen carefully. The wrong accountability partner becomes another audience, another source of pressure, another reason to perform. The right accountability partner is rare. Someone who cares about your character more than your image, someone who pushes you without shaming you, someone who respects your privacy and supports your consistency. So the Stoic approach is selective accountability. One person, maybe two. Quiet, specific, no broadcasting. But even if you have nobody, you can still rebuild, because the deepest accountability is the one you feel when you look at yourself honestly at night and ask, "Did I keep my word today?" That question is enough. Now here's the if-then that makes this habit concrete and daily. If you feel the urge to announce your progress, then do a private rep instead. One more rep of the habit, one more page, one more focused hour, one more boundary enforced calmly, one more night of good sleep, one more walk, one more hard conversation handled with restraint. Turn the urge for visibility into another brick in the foundation, because the foundation is what matters, not the applause. And over time, something beautiful happens. Your presence changes. You don't have to explain it. People can feel it. Your energy becomes calmer. Your decisions become cleaner. Your boundaries become firmer. Your eyes look steadier. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Your life starts to look different because you are different. And that leads naturally into the next point, because once you rebuild quietly, you eventually reach a moment where you don't need to introduce the new you at all. You simply arrive. You win in private, and then reality introduces you. 6. Win in private, then let reality introduce you. Have you ever met someone who didn't talk much about themselves, didn't advertise their discipline, didn't explain their boundaries, and yet you could feel something in them immediately, like they had weight, like they had a center, like they weren't asking the room for permission to exist? That is what happens when you win in private. And when I say win, I don't mean trophies, I don't mean status, I don't mean a highlight reel. I mean the quiet victories that most people never see and therefore never develop. The victory of getting up when you said you would, the victory of not reacting when your ego begs to react, the victory of staying consistent when nobody is watching, the victory of saying no without guilt, the victory of doing the hard thing first, the victory of walking away from what drains you even when it's tempting to stay. Those are private wins, and private wins create something that can't be faked. Presence. Stoicism would tell you this is the only kind of introduction that matters, because it's built on reality. Epictetus would say your life is your proof, your character is your argument. And the moment you stop trying to convince people with words, you start convincing them with outcomes, not the kind you brag about, but the kind that naturally shows through you. Marcus Aurelius would have respected this deeply. He lived in a world where people performed loyalty, performed wisdom, performed virtue, performed seriousness. And he kept reminding himself that virtue doesn't need theater. Virtue needs action. He would tell himself to remain simple, to remain disciplined, to remain focused on what's under his control, and to let everything else, praise, blame, interpretation, be noise. That is, winning in private. It's living in a way that makes you internally unshakable, regardless of what the crowd says. Seneca, too, warned about chasing recognition. He saw how applause can corrupt a person, how it makes you start doing things for display. And when you do that, your life becomes dependent on being seen. You become addicted to being acknowledged. And the moment the attention disappears, so does your drive. Private winning breaks that addiction. It gives you a source of confidence that doesn't need witnesses. Now, why does this matter so much for focusing on yourself and staying silent? Because one of the biggest reasons people talk is insecurity about progress. They talk to reassure themselves. They talk to feel supported. They talk to make the plan feel real. They talk to create external pressure so they have to follow through. And sometimes that works for a week. But long term, it creates a life where your drive is tied to external attention. That's fragile. Private winning makes your drive internal. It makes your standards internal. And once your standards are internal, your silence becomes natural. You stop telling people what you're going to do because you're busy doing it. You stop trying to manage how you're perceived because you're building something that doesn't depend on perception. You stop needing to be understood because you understand yourself. And then something happens that most people don't expect. Reality starts introducing you before you open your mouth. Your work speaks. Your calm speaks. Your boundaries speak. Your health speaks. Your consistency speaks. Your energy speaks. Even your absence speaks. Because when you stop being available for nonsense, the people who relied on your availability notice. When you stop reacting, the people who relied on your reactions feel exposed. When you stop over-explaining, the people who relied on your guilt lose leverage. This is why private winning is powerful. It changes the dynamics without requiring conversation. Now, there's a danger here, and it's important to name it so you don't fall into it. The danger is turning private winning into secret pride. You start thinking, I'll show them. You start building in silence, not for yourself, but to punish the people who doubted you. That may feel motivating at first, but it's still dependence. It's still the crowd living in your mind. It's still them sitting in your motivation. The Stoic way is cleaner. You don't win to prove them wrong. You win to prove yourself true. You win because you're tired of abandoning yourself. You win because you want a life you respect. You win because your soul feels better when you live aligned. That's not revenge. That's maturity. Epictetus would say, do not seek to be admired. Seek to be free. And freedom is built through self-mastery, not through showing off. So what does it look like to let reality introduce you in daily life? It looks like not announcing your new boundary, but enforcing it so consistently that people adjust. It looks like not explaining your discipline, but becoming reliable enough that people start trusting your word. It looks like not telling everyone you're changing, but showing up different, calmer, cleaner, less available for drama. It looks like not defending your decisions, but living them with steadiness until the debate dies on its own. Because most debates only continue when you keep feeding them, and the people who matter will eventually see the pattern. The people who don't matter will either lose interest or become louder. Either way, you're free. Now, there's another reason this is essential. Private winning protects your momentum. When you keep your victories private, you keep them safe from the two emotional traps that destroy consistency: inflation and deflation. Inflation is when a small win makes you arrogant. You start thinking you've arrived. You loosen standards. You stop doing the boring work. You start chasing praise. That kills progress. Deflation is when a small setback makes you ashamed. You start thinking you're doomed. You spiral. You quit. That also kills progress. Private winning keeps you centered because the wins are for you. They don't inflate the ego because they're not performed. They don't deflate you because they're not judged by others. They simply build identity. And identity is the real win. So here's a concrete method you can use to make this habit real, not inspirational. Choose one private scoreboard that only you see. Not a social scoreboard, not numbers you post. A personal scoreboard. It can be as simple as asking yourself each night, did I keep my word today? Did I protect my energy today? Did I avoid useless arguments today? Did I do the hard thing before the easy thing today? Did I act like the person I respect today? That's the private win. And the score is not for perfection, it's for awareness. Because awareness is what makes correction possible. Now here's the if-then that turns this into a daily discipline. If you feel the urge to announce a win, then convert it into another private rep. Take the energy of that urge and put it into the next action. Because the real win is not telling people you're winning. The real win is continuing. And over time, something almost poetic happens. You become less interesting to people who live on drama and more magnetic to people who live on substance. You stop attracting chaos because you stop feeding it. You stop attracting users because you stop being usable. You stop attracting spectators because you stop performing. Your reality changes because you changed the rules of access. And once you understand that access is the real currency, you begin to protect your energy like it is your currency, because it is. 7. Protect your energy like it's your currency. Have you ever reached the end of a day and realized you weren't really tired from work? You were tired from people, from noise, from small conversations that stole pieces of you, from emotional labor you didn't even notice you were doing until your mind felt foggy and your body felt heavy. That's energy leakage. And if you don't treat it seriously, it quietly ruins your life. Because focus is not only about what you do, it's about what you refuse to spend yourself on. The reason silence matters is not because silence is fashionable or because you're trying to be mysterious. Silence matters because it protects energy. It stops you from buying drama with your attention. It stops you from paying for other people's chaos with your peace. It stops you from donating your best hours to conversations that don't build anything. And when you finally see energy like currency, you stop spending it the way most people do. Impulsively, emotionally, to feel included, to feel needed, to feel seen. Stoicism is a philosophy of conserving what is truly yours. Epictetus would say your attention is yours, your judgments are yours, your choices are yours, and that's where your freedom lives. The moment you let the outside world dictate your inner state, you become poor in the one currency that matters. Marcus Aurelius would describe it in a different tone, but the message is the same. Don't let your mind be pulled around like a puppet. Don't let other people's moods become your weather. Don't let small things own you. Stay in your own command. When you protect energy, what you're really protecting is the ability to choose, because choice requires clarity, and clarity requires space. If your day is filled with constant emotional transactions, texts, arguments, gossip, comparison, over-explaining, people-pleasing, your mind becomes crowded, and a crowded mind makes weak decisions. It chooses comfort over purpose. It chooses impulse over values. It chooses relief over progress. So protecting energy is not selfish. It's strategic. It's self-respect in motion. Now, the hard part is that most people don't recognize the ways they spend energy until it's gone. They think they're just being polite, being friendly, being available, being a good person. But the truth is, you can be a good person and still be undisciplined with your energy. You can be kind and still be careless with your attention. And carelessness creates resentment, because when you keep giving where you shouldn't, you eventually feel used, even if nobody explicitly used you. You used yourself. Seneca would say this is one of the greatest wastes, not guarding your life. People think the big enemies are disasters, but often the real enemy is the small daily bleeding. 10 minutes here, 30 minutes there, one argument, one scroll, one unnecessary phone call, one conversation that you didn't want but felt guilty refusing. Multiply that by weeks and you've spent years. So let's get practical and clean. There are 3 main ways energy gets stolen. The first is attention theft. This is the constant pulling of your focus, notifications, feeds, random content, endless opinions. It doesn't just waste time, it fragments your mind. And a fragmented mind is easier to manipulate, easier to distract, easier to provoke. If you want to stay silent and focused, you have to defend attention like it's your mission, because it is. If you can't control attention, you can't control your life. The second is emotional theft. This is where people's moods, demands, and drama pull you into states you didn't choose. Someone is angry, and now you're tense. Someone is anxious, and now you're carrying their anxiety. Someone is confused and now you're trying to fix it. Someone wants to argue and now you're proving yourself. Emotional theft is expensive because it doesn't just take the moment. It takes the hours after, where you replay, regret, rehearse, fantasize. One useless argument can steal an entire evening. The third is social theft. This is the invisible pressure to be available, responsive, and nice, even when it's not aligned with your values. You respond quickly so you don't seem rude. You say yes so you don't disappoint. You explain so you don't seem cold. You show up to conversations you don't respect because you don't want to be judged. This is performance again. And performance is expensive. So how do you protect energy without becoming isolated or bitter? You become disciplined with access. Because every person, every conversation, every environment, every app, every habit, these are all forms of access to your mind. And your mind is not a public utility. Epictetus would tell you to train your desires and aversions, to be careful what you attach to. In modern terms, that means being careful what you give access to your attention, your emotions, and your time. Your peace is not fragile, it's valuable. And valuable things are protected. Here's what this looks like in real life, in a way you can actually apply. It looks like not responding immediately to everything. You give yourself space. You stop letting other people's urgency become your urgency. You choose response windows. You choose when you're available. Because constant availability is not kindness, it's a lack of boundaries. It looks like leaving conversations early when you feel them turning into emotional chaos. Not with a slam, not with a speech, with calm, with a clean exit. I've got to go. We'll talk later. And you go. You protect your state. You don't sit there letting someone spend your energy for free. It looks like reducing contact with people who always leave you depleted. Not because you hate them, because the cost is too high. And if you keep paying that cost, you're the one choosing it. It looks like guarding your mornings and your nights, because those are your most vulnerable windows. Mornings shape your direction. Nights shape your recovery. If you allow chaos into either, your entire day becomes softer, weaker, less clear. Stoicism would call that poor governance. It looks like choosing silence instead of explanation, because explanation is energy, defense is energy. Justification is energy, and many people don't deserve that energy. They are not judges. They are not stakeholders. They are not builders in your life. They are spectators, and spectators do not get your best currency. Now, here's the deepest part. Protecting energy requires accepting that some people will misunderstand you. This is where most people fail. They say, I want peace, but they also say, I need everyone to understand me. You can't have both. The need to be understood by everyone is a bottomless pit. It will pull you into endless conversation, endless clarification, endless emotional labor. Marcus Aurelius would say, let them misunderstand. Keep your character, keep your standard, keep your calm, because your life is too short to keep paying for other people's interpretations. So you start living with a new rule. If it costs you peace, it's too expensive. Not everything. Some things are worth the cost. Real love, real responsibility, real mission. But petty conflict, gossip, proving yourself, trying to change someone who isn't listening, that's not expensive, that's bankrupting. Now, here's a very practical tool that makes this habit feel real by the end of the week. Track your energy drains like you would track spending. Not with obsession, with awareness. You just notice what makes you feel depleted. Certain people, certain apps, certain times of day, certain conversations, certain topics. And once you see the pattern, you make one cut. One, not 10. One cut that saves you real energy. It might be turning off one set of notifications. It might be choosing not to engage in one type of argument. It might be reducing exposure to one person who always pulls you into chaos. It might be creating a no phone window in the morning. One cut. That's how wealth is built, not by one massive decision, but by small, consistent discipline. Energy works the same way. And here's the if, then you can use instantly. If you feel drained after interacting with something, someone, an app, a conversation, then immediately create distance for a moment. 2 minutes of silence, a walk, a breath, a reset. Because if you don't reset, you'll carry that drain into the next thing and contaminate your day. Protecting energy is not only prevention, it's recovery. Over time, you become less reactive because you're not constantly depleted. You become more focused because your mind has space. You become more silent because you're not spending your life on commentary. And then you realize something powerful. The best reply is often not words, it's results. When your energy is protected, you can build results, and results become your only reply. 8. Let results be your only reply. 4. Have you ever noticed how arguments have a strange way of multiplying? Like, even when you win the conversation, you still feel tired, still feel dirty inside, still feel like you spent something you can't get back. That's because most arguments are not about truth. They're about ego, control, and emotional relief. People don't debate to understand. They debate to dominate. They talk to unload. They talk to provoke. They talk to feel powerful for a moment. And if you keep replying with words, you keep feeding the game. You keep staying in the arena where nothing is ever settled because the goal was never resolution. It was engagement. This is why one of the strongest forms of silence is replacing your reply with results. Not as a flex, not as revenge, as discipline. Results are clean. Results don't beg. Results don't argue. Results don't over-explain. Results don't chase approval. Results simply appear, and the room adjusts. Stoicism aligns with this because it's built on action. Epictetus would say, "You are not what you claim. You are what you do." You can talk about patience all day, but the first moment you react impulsively, the truth is revealed. You can talk about boundaries all day, but the first moment you tolerate disrespect, the truth is revealed. So, the Stoic path is to stop trying to be believed and start becoming undeniable through consistent behavior. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world full of talk, political talk, gossip, accusations, praise, blame. He understood that you could spend your entire life trying to correct other people's narratives and still die misunderstood. So, he trained himself to focus on one thing: the integrity of his actions. Do the right thing. Do it with calm. Let the noise be noise. That's letting results be your reply. Seneca would warn you that many people want to pull you into their chaos because it gives them a sense of control. When you argue back, you confirm their power. They can move your emotions. They can change your state. They can steal your attention. But when you don't respond with words and you respond with reality, consistent standards, consistent progress, consistent calm, you take the control back without fighting. Now, let's bring this down to earth with the situations that usually hook people. Someone doubts you. They make a comment like, "You're not going to stick to that." The old you wants to prove them wrong immediately, with words, with promises, with defensiveness. But those words don't build anything. They just give the other person a front row seat in your mind. The Stoic move is to say less or nothing, and then build quietly until the doubt becomes irrelevant. Someone misjudges you. They interpret your silence as weakness. They call you cold. They label you. The old you rushes to correct the label, to be understood, to manage perception. The Stoic move is to let their label exist and keep living in a way that contradicts it. Because if you try to convince someone who is committed to misunderstanding, you will waste your life. If you keep your standard, reality will eventually speak louder than their words. Someone insults you. The old you wants a sharp comeback. That desire feels powerful for a second, but it ties you to their energy. It makes them your emotional boss. The Stoic move is to ask, what kind of man needs the last word with someone he doesn't respect? If you want to reply, reply with dignity, with calm, with a short line. But often the strongest reply is your unaffected progress. Someone tries to bait you into drama. They want a reaction. They want you to get loud. They want you to become emotional so they can feel important. Results are the refusal to play. Results are you saying, without saying, you can't pull me into this. Now, here's the part that people misunderstand. Results don't have to be big to be powerful. A result can be internal. The result of not reacting is a result. The result of staying calm under provocation is a result. The result of sticking to your routine when you feel like quitting is a result. The result of protecting your energy and leaving a draining conversation is a result. The result of keeping your word to yourself is a result. These are not visible trophies, but they change your life faster than trophies because they build character, and character is the source of visible results later. So when we say, let results be your only reply, we're not saying, be silent and do nothing. We're saying, be silent and do the work that makes words unnecessary. Now, why is this so hard? Because words are easier than work. Words give instant relief. Work gives delayed reward. Words give you a feeling of control in the moment. Work gives you real control over time. Words can be performed in a minute. Results require days, weeks, sometimes months of quiet repetition. That delay is where most people quit, and that's why most people stay loud. They talk because they can't tolerate the silence between effort and payoff. They need reassurance. They need validation. They need someone to say, yes, it's working. And when nobody says it, they get anxious and they start announcing, explaining, defending. The Stoic path is to tolerate the delay, to trust the process without needing constant emotional proof. This is why your silence becomes a weapon against your own impatience. Silence forces you to sit with the uncertainty. It forces you to let the work be the work. It forces you to stop distracting yourself with commentary. And if you can do that, you become rare. Now let's make it extremely practical with a rule you can carry into any moment of provocation. When someone triggers you, you pause and ask, what reply would my future self respect? Not what reply would win the moment. Not what reply would make them quiet. Not what reply would make me look strong. What reply would my future self respect? Sometimes the answer is one calm sentence. Sometimes the answer is leaving. Sometimes the answer is silence. But often the answer is keep building and let time prove the truth. Because time is the ultimate judge, and time favors consistency. Now, there's a second rule that makes this even sharper. Don't argue about what you're going to do. Do it. Then, if you choose to speak, speak from reality, not from intention. Intention is cheap. Reality is expensive. Let your words come after your action, not before it. This also protects you from a dangerous habit, making promises you can't yet keep. Many people talk themselves into a future identity they haven't built, and then they collapse under their own claims. But when you move quietly, your identity grows at a pace that your nervous system can hold. You don't need to lie to yourself with grand speeches. You don't need to impress anyone. You just become. Seneca would call this living with integrity. Epictetus would call it living according to your chosen principles. Marcus would call it living in accordance with nature, doing the work that is yours to do. Now, here's an if-then that turns this into a daily discipline. If you feel pulled into proving yourself with words, then replace one sentence with one action. Literally, one action. Close the app, do the set, write the paragraph, study the lesson, clean the room, take the walk, make the call, sleep on time, enforce the boundary. One action that makes your life stronger. That action is your reply. And here's what will happen over time if you live this way. People who live on drama will get bored with you. They will try harder for a while because your calm frustrates them. Then they will move on because you're no longer giving them the reward they want. And people who live on substance will start respecting you more. Not because you demanded it, because your life signals stability. Your presence signals self-command. Your choices signal standards. That is the kind of respect you can live with, and it naturally leads to the next truth. Because once you stop replying with words and start replying with results, you become more selective about who even gets access to you at all. You realize that curiosity is not a credential, and just because someone wants to know doesn't mean they deserve to. Access is earned. 9. Access is earned, not given because they're curious. Have you ever felt that subtle pressure to be open, to answer personal questions, to explain your choices, to share your plans? Not because you wanted to, but because someone was watching you with curiosity, and you didn't want to seem rude or guarded or difficult. That pressure is one of the quiet ways people lose control of their life. Because once you start giving access out of guilt, you teach everyone around you a dangerous rule. If I ask enough, if I push enough, if I act offended enough, you will eventually open the door. And then you wonder why you feel exposed. You wonder why you feel drained. You wonder why people know things about you that you wish they didn't know. But the truth is simple. You didn't protect the gate. Stoicism is gatekeeping in the healthiest sense, not arrogance, not coldness, discernment. Epictetus taught that your inner world is yours to govern, and governance means selection. You don't hand your attention to anything that reaches for it. You don't hand your trust to anyone who asks for it. You don't hand your story to people who haven't proven they can hold it with respect. Because not everyone is trustworthy, and pretending they are is not kindness, it's naivety. Marcus Aurelius knew this personally. He dealt with flattery, manipulation, betrayal, people who smiled in public and undermined in private. He had to learn to keep his mind guarded without becoming bitter. He had to learn to be fair without being naive. That is the heart of this point. Protect your access, not because you hate people, but because you respect yourself. Seneca would warn that many people approach you not to understand you, but to use you. Use your time, your energy, your attention, your emotional labor, your generosity. Sometimes it's intentional, often it's unconscious. But the effect is the same. If you keep giving access without standards, you end up empty. So let's define access because it's broader than people realize. Access is not only who can call you. Access is who can influence your mood. Access is who can pull you into an argument. Access is who gets your attention during your best hours. Access is who gets to know your vulnerabilities. Access is who gets to hear your plans before they're built. Access is who gets you when you're tired and soft and unguarded. Every one of these is a door into your life. And doors are meant to be opened intentionally, not automatically. Now, this is where people get confused. They think being selective makes them selfish. They think saying no makes them cold. They think privacy makes them dishonest. They think boundaries make them harsh. But what they're really afraid of is this. The moment they stop giving access freely, some people will react because those people weren't enjoying you. They were enjoying access to you. They were enjoying being able to reach you whenever they wanted. They were enjoying the emotional control. They were enjoying the fact that you were easy to pull into their world. So when you become more selective, they call it a problem. They may guilt you. They may shame you. They may act offended. They may ask, "Why are you like this?" They may say, "Who do you think you are?" They may frame your boundary as arrogance. But the Stoic would say their reaction is not a verdict. It's information. It tells you who respected you and who exploited you. And that information is priceless. Epictetus would teach you to look at what is in your control, your choices, not their opinions, not their emotions, not their interpretation. So when someone pushes for access and you feel that old guilt rising, you pause and you remember, guilt is not always a sign you did something wrong. Sometimes guilt is the withdrawal symptom of people-pleasing. Sometimes it's the old habit of being available to earn safety. So you don't obey guilt blindly. You examine it. You ask, has this person earned access, or are they just curious? Because curiosity is not a credential. Curiosity is cheap. A person can be curious about you and still be careless with you. They can be curious and still gossip. They can be curious and still judge. They can be curious and still sabotage. They can be curious and still use what you share against you later. So access isn't given because someone wants it. Access is earned through patterns of respect, discretion, consistency, and goodwill. This is maturity. And it changes everything about your life because it forces you to move from emotional relationships to principled relationships. Now, what does it look like to make access earned in daily life? It looks like not answering every question, even simple ones, if the energy behind the question feels off. You can feel it. Some questions are genuine. Some questions are fishing hooks. They're designed to pull you into explaining, confessing, revealing. When you sense the hook, you don't bite. You stay calm. You answer lightly, or you redirect, or you keep it private. It looks like not letting people's urgency dictate your availability. Someone texts, calls, demands immediate attention. The old you feels pressured to respond to prove you care. The new you understands. Care does not require immediacy. Access is not an emergency service. You respond when it's appropriate, not when it's demanded. It looks like distinguishing between people who support your growth and people who consume your growth as entertainment. Some people want to see you improve because it inspires them. Others want to see you improve because it gives them something to talk about. The second group doesn't deserve access to the process. They can meet the finished version if they earn it. It looks like protecting your vulnerable moments. When you're tired, when you're emotional, when you're uncertain, those are the moments you're most likely to overshare. And the people who push hardest during those moments are often the ones who benefit from you being uncentered. So you learn to slow down. You learn to postpone conversations. You learn to say, "I'll think about it." That single phrase can save your life because it creates space for wisdom to return. Now, there's a deeper reason this point matters. Access determines identity. Because the people and inputs you allow close to you shape how you think, how you feel, what you normalize, what you tolerate, what you believe is possible. If you give access to chaos, you become chaotic. If you give access to shallow talk, your mind becomes shallow. If you give access to disrespect, your self-respect becomes negotiable. But if you give access to steadiness, your life becomes steadier. So being selective is not only about protection, it's about creation. You are building a life, and every door you open becomes part of that life. Seneca would say you must choose your company carefully because it rubs off on you. Not only friends, but the entire environment of influence around you. A Stoic understands that the mind is shaped by what it repeatedly touches. Access is what you allow your mind to touch. So you start choosing with intention. Now, I want to give you a practical structure for earning access, because this is where people either become too open or too closed. Think of access like levels, and the level is earned through time and proof. Level 1, politeness. Most people get this. Basic respect, basic friendliness, light conversation. Level 2, trust. Fewer people get this. This requires discretion, consistency, and respect for your boundaries. Level 3, intimacy. Very few people get this. This requires proven loyalty, care, and a track record of handling your truth with safety. You don't need to announce these levels, you just live them. And if someone tries to jump levels, someone you barely trust demanding deep access, that's a sign. They want intimacy without earning it. They want closeness without responsibility. They want your soft parts without the work of being safe. And you don't have to be cruel, you simply don't comply, because you respect yourself. Here's the if, then, that makes this habit immediate. If you feel pressured to share more than you want to share, then slow down and give less. Give the simplest version, or say, I'm keeping that private, or I'm focused on it, but I'm not talking about it much. Then hold the silence. Let the pressure float in the air without rushing to fix it. Silence is how you keep the gate. Over time, this changes your relationships in a beautiful, clean way. The people who respect you will adjust and remain. The people who only wanted access will drift or become louder. Either way, you become clearer. And once you become clear about access, something else becomes easy. You stop needing to win every conversation. You stop needing the last word, because needing the last word is often just another attempt to control how you're perceived. And when your boundaries are real, when your access is guarded, when your results are doing the talking, you no longer need that final punchline. The strongest people don't need the last word. That's where we go next. 10. The strongest people don't need the last word. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and realized you weren't actually fighting for truth? You were fighting for relief, fighting for control, fighting to erase the discomfort of being misunderstood. That's what needing the last word really is. It's not strength, it's tension. It's the nervous system trying to close a loop. It's ego trying to reclaim status. It's fear trying to stop uncertainty. And the reason it feels so urgent in the moment is because your mind treats social friction like danger, as if silence means you're losing. But silence doesn't mean you're losing. Silence means you're choosing, and that ability to choose, especially when your emotions are loud, is one of the clearest signs of strength. Stoicism is almost built for this. Epictetus would say, if someone insults you, misjudges you, provokes you, and you immediately need to answer, then they are controlling you. Not because they are powerful, but because you are attached. Attached to being right. Attached to being seen correctly. Attached to not being disrespected. Attached to not feeling that sting of, they don't get me. And those attachments are invisible chains. Marcus Aurelius understood that you can't control the minds of others, and the more you try, the more you suffer. He saw that much of life is people acting out of ignorance, insecurity, or impulse, and his discipline was not to fix everyone. His discipline was to govern himself. That means sometimes letting a misunderstanding exist, sometimes letting an insult fall to the floor, sometimes letting someone leave with the wrong story about you. Not because you're weak, because you're free. Seneca would go even further and remind you that anger and argument often punish you more than they punish the other person. You lose your calm, you lose your time, you lose your dignity, you lose the evening replaying it in your head. Meanwhile, the other person moves on or even enjoys the reaction they pulled out of you. So the Stoic question becomes brutally practical. Why would you pay for a conversation that makes you poorer? This is the habit. Stop paying. And it begins with noticing the exact moment the urge rises. That moment is familiar. Someone says something sharp. Someone misunderstands you. Someone questions your choices. Someone throws a subtle insult, and you feel the heat, the sentence forming, the comeback preparing, the explanation loading. The mind wants to jump in, to correct, to win, to dominate, and the body often reacts first. A faster heartbeat, tighter jaw, a need to respond immediately. That is the moment where strength is decided. Not in the response you give, but in the pause you create. Because if you can pause, you can choose. And if you can choose, you are sovereign. Now, this habit doesn't mean you never speak up. Stoicism is not passivity. There are times to correct, there are times to confront, there are times to say the truth clearly. But even then, the Stoic standard is that your speech must come from clarity, not from craving, from principle, not from heat. And craving is exactly what the last word is. A craving. You crave the feeling of closure. You crave the feeling of dominance. You crave the feeling that you won. But the problem is, that kind of win doesn't build your life. It builds your ego, and ego is expensive. So the stronger form of closure is internal closure. It's you deciding, I'm done feeding this. It's you deciding, I don't need to fix their opinion. It's you deciding, I will not buy relief with my dignity. This is what the strongest people do. They don't need to win every exchange because they're not building their identity inside conversations. Their identity is built elsewhere, in discipline, in standards, in actions, in private integrity, so they can walk away without feeling like they lost themselves. Now, let's make this real with some common situations. You're in a relationship, and a disagreement starts sliding into disrespect. The old you tries to argue harder, tries to force understanding, tries to get the last word to make the point. The new you recognizes the pattern early and chooses a boundary instead of a debate. You say calmly, we can talk when we're both respectful, and you stop. Not to punish, to protect. That is strength. You're at work, and someone throws a jab. The old you burns hours thinking of the perfect reply, the perfect email, the perfect way to put them in their place. The new you asks, does this help my mission? If the answer is no, you don't feed it. You keep working. You let your competence speak. That is strength. You're dealing with family or old friends, and they try to pull you back into the old version of you. They tease, they comment, they provoke. The old you defends, the new you stays calm. You don't become a different person in order to explain why you're different. You stay steady, you change the subject, you leave early if needed. That is strength. The pattern is always the same. The last word is usually a bid for control in a situation where you feel exposed. But once you see that, you can replace it. Because the truth is, the last word rarely changes anyone. It rarely creates real respect. It rarely produces clarity. Most of the time, it produces more friction, more drama, more replay in your head, more emotional hangover. So the real question is, what are you protecting when you fight for the last word? If you're protecting truth, speak with calm and brevity. If you're protecting ego, choose silence. And if you're not sure which it is, that's already your answer. Pause first. Now, there's a deeper layer that turns this habit from self-control into a way of life, letting people be wrong about you. That's a hard sentence for many people because being misjudged feels like injustice. But Stoicism would say, you do not control the minds of others, so don't build your peace on controlling them. The desire to be understood by everyone is a bottomless hunger. You'll never satisfy it, and chasing it will drain your life. So instead, you shift the goal. The goal is not everyone understands me. The goal is I understand me and I live accordingly. That's what makes silence powerful. That's what makes focus possible. That's what makes you unshakable. And this is where the habit becomes almost peaceful. When you don't need the last word, you start hearing your own mind again. You start noticing how much energy you used to spend rehearsing imaginary arguments. You start noticing how many hours you used to donate to people who didn't deserve them. And that energy returns to you like a quiet refund. You become calmer. You become clearer. You become more productive. You become harder to manipulate, because manipulation often works through provocation. If someone can pull your reaction, they can steer your attention. But if you can hold your silence, you become difficult to steer. Epictetus would call that freedom. Now, here's the if. Then that makes this habit automatic in the real world. If you feel the urge to get the last word, then take one breath and ask, what does my silence protect right now? If the answer is my peace, then let silence do its job. If the answer is my ego, then let silence teach you humility. Either way, silence becomes your teacher. And if you do need to speak, keep it clean. One sentence, one boundary, one truth. No extra heat, no extra justification, no performance, just clarity. Because strength isn't loud. Strength is controlled. Strength doesn't chase closure outside itself. Strength knows when to speak and when to stop. And when you live like that, when you focus on yourself, guard your energy, keep your plans private, let results speak, decide who earns access, and refuse the addiction of the last word, you don't just become quieter, you become harder to disturb. And maybe that's the rarest kind of power, not winning every conversation, but winning your own mind. Have you ever wondered how much of your exhaustion isn't coming from your responsibilities, but from the fact that you keep handing pieces of yourself away in small moments all day long and calling it normal? Because when you really look at it, most people aren't suffering from a lack of potential, they're suffering from leakage. Leakage through explaining, leakage through reacting, leakage through trying to be understood, leakage through giving access to people who haven't earned it, leakage through fighting for the last word like it's a matter of survival. And once you see that, the whole path becomes simpler. This isn't about becoming cold. It isn't about punishing people with silence. It isn't about acting mysterious or turning your life into some performance of distance. It's about control in the healthiest sense. It's about choosing where your attention goes, choosing what deserves your energy, choosing what stays private, choosing when you speak and when you let silence do the work for you. Because silence, when it's built on self-respect, is not emptiness, it's structure. It's the space where your mind can finally breathe. It's the gap that stops you from reacting and starts you choosing. It's the shield that keeps your future from being consumed by other people's curiosity, their opinions, their drama, their endless need for access. And if you take anything from this episode, let it be this quiet truth. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to announce who you are becoming. You don't need to win every exchange. You don't need to explain your boundaries like you're asking permission. You don't need to live with an audience in your head. You can build a life that speaks for you. And that life is built the same way, every time, through private wins, consistent standards, and calm restraint when your ego wants to get loud. So as you finish this, don't try to apply everything at once. Just pick one place where you've been leaking, one habit of over-explaining, one relationship where access is too easy, one argument you keep replaying, one moment where you always need the last word, and choose one clean correction, one pause, one boundary, one act of discipline. Let that be your starting point. And if you ever feel yourself slipping back into the old reflex, talking too much, proving too much, reacting too fast, come back to one simple question. Is this worth my energy? Because your energy is your life. And once you start spending it like it matters, everything changes. Quietly, steadily, for good.